Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode we will be covering the Ashanti Empire and the Mexican Empire. So the Mexican Empire is often divided into the first and second Mexican Empire, however they're for shorter periods, so we've combined them into one episode here. It's kind of arbitrary how we do this sometimes. For example, with the Portuguese Empire, we also have a first and second empire period, however we combine them. Whereas with the Spanish Empire, we have the Spanish Empire, and then we have the Iberian Union, which is technically we could consider still part of the Spanish Empire. But nonetheless, I have this phrase, without a certain amount of arbitrariness, nothing can get done. So without deciding these details, we perhaps could never have these episodes. So thus we have the first and second empire combined in this one. So we have as well a specific leader from each empire. So from the Ashanti Empire we will be highlighting Osei Tutu, and from the Mexican Empire we will be highlighting, particularly the first Mexican Empire, we will be highlighting Agustín de Iturbide. So two very fascinating leaders, and at the end, in the style of Plutarch's Lives, in the very first series we have in this channel, we will have a comparison between the two leaders in the style, once again, of Plutarch's Parallel Lives, to learn a bit more about the two leaders through their differences, and as well about their two respective empires. So, with the first empire, the Ashanti Empire. So the Ashanti Empire is located in modern-day Ghana, however small parts as well in Côte d'Ivoire and Togo as well, West Africa, and it was one of the most powerful and influential African kingdoms. Its history spans from the late 17th century to the late 19th century, and it was marked by significant military prowess, economic prosperity, and cultural development, as we shall see. But first, for some background information, so also known as Ashanti Empire, or Asantemen, or today commonly called Ashanti Empire, as we have, was an Akan state that lasted from 1701 to 1901 CE Common Era in what is modern-day Ghana, and as well small parts in Côte d'Ivoire and Togo. It expanded from the Ashanti region to include most of Ghana and, once again, parts of the Ivory Coast and Togo. Due to the empire's military prowess, wealth, architecture, sophisticated hierarchy, and culture, the Ashanti Empire has been extensively studied and has more historic records written by European, particularly British, authors than any other indigenous culture in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a plethora of resources. So maybe some of our more older empires, unfortunately, if one would like to find more research, it's hard to find, but if one is fascinated in this empire, which I hope one is, there's many resources that they can look at. So for the rise, so for all of our empires, we will seek to find the rise and the fall to perhaps maybe make modern implications as to why countries might rise and fall today. So, starting with its rise, so the origins and formation of the Ashanti Empire. So the Ashanti Empire traces its origins to the Akan people, who settled in the region in modern-day Ghana. The formation of the Ashanti Empire began in the late 1600s under the leadership of Osei Tutu, who we'll highlight in a specific biography soon, who united along with his chief priest and advisor Okomfu Onoke, they therefore united various Akan states into a centralized kingdom. The unification process was solidified by the creation of what's known as the Golden Stool, as we have an image to come, a symbol of the Ashanti nation and its unity. As for the military expansion and consolidation, as mentioned, the military prowess was a key to the rise and success of the Ashanti Empire. So under Osei Tutu's reign, which was from approximately 1680 to 1717, it marked the beginning of the military expansion. So one way, there are many ways of defining an empire, but as if it's exerting military force is one evidence of what quantifies as an empire. But once again, Michael Doyle's book Empires is a great resource for further study. And he united various Akan states into a centralized kingdom. So we've seen many in our nomadic empires, particularly where you have, for example, Genghis Khan is actually one of the later ones, but an individual who unites multiple tribes to form an empire. The unification, but also part of their decline, perhaps as we shall see, is sometimes due to fragmentation, but the unification process was solidified by the creation of the Golden Stool once again. which marked a symbol of the Akan nation and its unity. So, furthermore, the Ashanti military, known for its organization and discipline, conquered neighboring states and expanded its territory. The Battle of the Fayese in 1701 was a pivotal moment, and as the Ashanti defeated the Denkira, a dominant force in the region, so defeating one of the major players in this battle in 1701, and therefore secured their independence and dominance. So if they're exerting military force, they must be self-sufficient. One is not. If you're exerting force, if you're being offensive, you probably have a good defense as well. There's kind of a cliche, a good offense is the best defense, but vice versa might also be true. As for the economic prosperity, so the Ashanti Kingdom's economy thrived through the trade of gold, cola, nuts, and slaves. The Kumasi, which was the capital, became a major trading hub as well. So we also note that sometimes trade is not only good. Military and economy are necessarily combined, but also trade can be a way to diffuse threats. If one is a trading partner, maybe they're less likely to go to war, and maybe they're a good trading partner because they had a good relationship to begin with as well, and therefore also a good military relationship. The Ashanti also developed sophisticated high craft industry, producing high-quality textiles, metalwork, and pottery. The wealth generated from this trade and crafts further funded the military campaigns and the empire's expansion. So once again, economy and military are often inexorably combined. As for the zenith of the Ashanti Empire, with its political structure and governance, so the Ashanti Empire was a confederation of chiefdoms. So the Federalist Papers, for example, there's a difference between a confederation and a federation, where the latter is in many sometimes considered to be more unified. But sometimes it's just people don't know this distinction, so one might accidentally call a federation a confederation. But in this case, it was slightly less combined than a federation. But it doesn't have to be a federation to be an empire as well. We've covered some leagues which are even perhaps weaker than a confederation as well, or the same as a confederation. But once again, it's naming convention, and sometimes there's gray areas in between. Furthermore, the Asantehene, or the king, wielded the central authority as well, so a centralized government. There could be democracies, oligarchies, and monarchies, and this would be the monarchy, or the three types of governance as described by Montesquieu, Baron de Montesquieu, in The Spirit of the Laws. But the local chiefs retain significant autonomy as well, so somewhat decentralized power. But there's also the concept of divide and conquer, as we saw maybe one of our earliest examples with the Persian Empire, with the satraps and the satrapies, who were like governors who sort of, by dividing the realm, it was easier to control, a bigger bureaucracy, one might call it. Furthermore, the golden stool, believed to embody the spirit of the Ashanti people, was essential to the political and spiritual life of the empire. As for cultural achievements, the Ashanti Empire was renowned for its rich cultural heritage. The Akan language and the development of the Adinkra symbols used in textiles and pottery are significant cultural contributions. As mentioned, this is probably the most documented empire in this sub-Saharan region of Africa by the Europeans, particularly European authors notably. Festivals such as the Ade Kese celebrated the unity and strength of the Ashanti people. So, as we've seen in maybe our Roman empires, for example, the Roman triumph was not only a way to maybe increase popularity, but also pride and maybe military prowess within the state. As for relations with the Europeans, so the Ashanti engaged in complex relationships with the European powers, particularly the British and the Dutch. Hence, perhaps one of the reasons why the British later documented so much on them was because they had a relationship at that time as well. They traded gold and slaves with the Europeans in the exchange for firearms and other goods, so making perhaps a big sacrifice in terms of people often, or even the people that they captured in terms of slaves, but getting guns, which would have given them a very significant military advantage for any without guns. These relationships, however, were often marked by both cooperation and conflict. Thus came the decline and fall of the Ashanti Empire. So the starting with internal strife and external pressures. The two often coincide with each other. So by the mid-19th century, internal strife and succession disputes weakened the Ashanti Empire. Additionally, the increasing presence of the European colonial powers posed significant challenges. So they were quite a mismatch in terms of military abilities between the colonial powers and this empire, although amongst its peers it was relatively was the most powerful in the region for its time compared to these colonial powers. There's a great this case study by Guns, Germs, and Steel, which describes why was it that the Europeans conquered these indigenous peoples and not vice versa. These relationships were often marked by, however, conflict and strife, as noted. The British in particular sought to assert control over the region, leading to the series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Ashanti Wars. Michael Doyle also in Empires discusses the sort of the division of the Africa, which is a very interesting case study as well. As for the decline and fall of the Ashanti Empire, so by the mid-19th century, internal strife and succession disputes weakened the empire. So therefore, as noted, perhaps because they would combine multiple tribes, there's inherently somewhat of a lack of cohesion, or perhaps some of these families or tribes wanted to gain autonomy, or perhaps it was also those equivalent of governors that they created within the region. As for further on to the Anglo-Ashanti Wars, the Anglo-Ashanti Wars, which lasted from 1824 to 1900 CE, were a series of conflicts between the Ashanti Empire and the British Empire. The wars stemmed from the disputes over trade, territorial expansion, and control of central regions, and coastal regions particularly as well. Despite their formidable military, the Ashanti were gradually worn down by the British forces, also the more populous state too, who had superior technology and resources. As for the final defeat of the Ashanti Empire, so the decisive conflict came in 1896 when the British captured Kumasi and exiled the Asantehene, or the King Prempeh the first, pardon me for my pronunciation. Although the Ashanti briefly resisted in the War of the Golden Stool, it is called, in 1900s, or a resurgence, they were ultimately defeated at this time. In 1902, the British formally annexed the Ashanti Empire, incorporating it into the Gold Coast colony, so one of the many states to suffer a similar fate under the British Empire, which is a very large, the largest empire perhaps, that we shall soon cover. Depending on whether, yes, it is the largest, but one might also contest that the Mongol Empire, because it was on one landmass, could be larger, but the British Empire was the largest, at least according to almost all metrics. So, as therefore the legacy of the Ashanti Empire, so all that goes to say it would have been, it's not that necessarily the Ashanti Empire was at fault on their own, whereas many other great empires also suffered this fate from the British Empire. So once again, to the legacy of the Ashanti Empire. So despite its fall, the Ashanti left a lasting legacy. The Ashanti culture, traditions, and language continue to thrive in modern-day Ghana, a very significant state in Africa still till this day. The Golden Stool remains a powerful symbol of unity and identity of the Ashanti people. The history of the Ashanti Empire is a testament to the resilience and the ingenuity of its people, and it continues to be celebrated and studied as a significant chapter in African history, and perhaps the most documented as well. So a very great case study and a good starting point for perhaps African history during the colonial periods. So as for the specific leader, we have Osei Tutu. So therefore we'll have a biography of Osei Tutu, the founding father of the Ashanti Empire. But for some background information, so for his full name is Osei Kofi Tutu I, who lived from approximately 1660 to approximately 1717 CE. And he was one of the founders of the Ashanti Empire, assisted by his priest Okomfu Onokie, his chief priest and distant relative from the town of Awukagua. Akupem. The Asante comes from the Akan ethnic group of West Africa, and Osei Tutu I led the alliance of the Asante states against the regional hegemony known as the Denkiya, which were basically by asserting their autonomy or against and defeating the existing ceding power and uniting the tribes, he formed this empire and completely defeating them. And he completely defeated this Denkira people, and therefore created the Ashanti Empire. Furthermore, he ruled the Kwamen state between approximately 1680 to 1695. So he ruled before he formed the Ashanti Empire as well, and as well in 1701, where he was definitively referred to as Kumashene, or King, or Kumahene, in 1695, and he ruled the Ashanti Empire from the late 1701 to 1717. So, although the empire wasn't necessarily formed for his whole life, he is one of our great founding emperors, and he also ruled even before founding the empire, but not necessarily in a linear way as it transitioned to become an empire. But would the Ashanti Empire have existed if it weren't for him? It's perhaps unlikely, at least in my estimation. So, but to start with his early life and background. So, Osei Tutu, born in 1660, is widely regarded as the most important leader in the history of the Ashanti Empire. His exact birth date, however, and early life and details are shrouded in oral tradition and therefore subject to varying degrees of accuracy, but nonetheless approximately 1660 is considered to be his birth date. But he was born to the Oyoko clan, was one of the several Akan clans, so he was born into one of the leading clans of the majority of what would become the empire, the Ashanti Empire of the Akan people. So some of our leaders have come from minority groups. It wouldn't be said to be true for the Ashanti Empire, but because the empire didn't exist before him, they could be considered a minority relative to the other empire. Therefore, and he was born in the Okoyo clan in the small town of Kokofu in present-day Ghana. The Oyoko clan was one of the several Akan clans that settled in the region. Osei Tutu's lineage was significant as it was considered a royal family with a heritage of leadership. So some of our leaders have come from varying degrees of success. He did come from a royal family, but his royal family wasn't necessarily an empire at that time. So a great upbringing, but maybe not as advantageous as it could have been. But if one is looking for net change in circumstances, maybe slightly better to be a former of an empire. So as for his rise to power, so Osei Tutu's rise to prominence began when he was sent to Denkira, a powerful neighboring state, to serve at the court of its king. So he served under this other empire as well. His experience exposed him to the complexities of governance and military strategy. So in many ways, the Ashanti was influenced by this former empire through Osei Tutu. Upon his return to his homeland, he succeeded his uncle Obiri Yaboa as chief of the Okoyo settlement, or Yoko settlement, in 1680. So succeeding to his uncle, not necessarily his father, however. His unification of the Ashanti states, period. So the most transformative period of Osei Tutu's life was his collaboration with the priest Okomfu Anoke, and together they envisioned the unifying of the fragmented Akan states into a single powerful entity, a common sort of theme amongst many of our empires to unite the tribes, the clans. And therefore they Okomfu and Yoke's, pardon me for our translations, spiritual authority and Osei's military and political acumen complemented each other perfectly. So through this combination of having religious authority and military prowess, they formed and united these peoples. Could he have done it without his chief priest? It's perhaps maybe questionable or debatable. Therefore, the unification process culminated in the creation of the Ashanti Empire. The golden stool crafted by Okomfu Anoke became a symbol of the unified Ashanti people. So by creating this stool from the chief priest also gave him greater authority. Also, as we noted, a form of centralization is linking the state to the religion, as we saw in some of our very earliest empires with the Egyptian empires, where church and state were combined and king was God. this isn't exactly true here, where the priest is separated, but his authority is in some ways given to him by this priest. And therefore this stool, as well as symbolic element, became the embodiment of the Ashanti nation's soul as well. As for his military campaigns and expansion, so under Osei Tutu's leadership, the Ashanti Empire expanded significantly. He reconstructed the army, creating a well-organized and disciplined force. His most significant military achievement was the defeat of the Dankira at the Battle of Viase in 1701, so defeating the incumbent leading empire in this region. The victory liberated the Ashanti from the Dankira dominance and established the Ashanti as a formidable power in the region. The Osei Tutu continued to lead military campaigns and expanded the Ashanti territory and influence even after this period, and his strategic and diplomatic skills ensured loyalty and amongst the conquered states and integrated them into the Ashanti Empire, so they were some ways maybe respected him after he conquered them and at least joined him, or at least did not continue to rebel as too much documented. As for governance and administration of his state that continued to grow throughout his life, so Osei Tutu was not only a warrior but an astute administrator as well, public administration. He established the Kumasi as the capital, so many of our leaders who have made it in the top list of most important leaders have also founded capitals, which is a form of centralization, or even moved the capital where one had already existed, or moved slightly away, for example, the Paris examples, to Versailles. The Ashanti Empire was organized as a confederation of various states, each with its local chief, known as the Amahene. However, the Asatahene, which is the king, was embodied by Osei Tutu, and he held supreme authority, so centralization, but also a sort of divide and conquer once again, particularly in matters of war and foreign policy. So to the chief head of state, war and foreign policy were to them, and that is sort of still true in most countries even today. He instituted what is known as the Ashanti Confederacy, a council of chiefs to advise him and assist in governing the empire. This system ensured the balance of powers and maintained the loyalty of the constituent states. So forming a council as well, so very much an innovator in many ways, not only on the battlefield, but in the court and council, but even in some ways religion through his chief priest, in which in many ways he, vice versa, influenced. But as for his death and legacy, on the culture, so the Ashanti culture, language, and traditions were promoted and preserved under him. The arts flourished particularly in the creation of the intricate gold, jewelry, textiles, and wood carving, which would also be beneficial in trade over the future course of the empire. Festivals such as the Ade Kese celebrated the unity and strength of the Ashanti people and reinforced their cultural identity. So once again, festivals as a way to create unities. Think of the Roman triumphs, for example, as we had in Rome. As for death and legacy, so Osei Tutu's life came to an end in 1717 during a campaign against the Akyem people. Despite his death, his legacy endured. He is remembered as the founding father of the Ashanti Empire, a unifier and a visionary leader. I think to be called a unifier is one of the greatest things one can. The institutions and structures he established continue to shape the Ashanti Empire for centuries. Unifying doesn't only have to be done through military prowess. It can be done through music. It can be done through any different ways. But I think to unite people is sort of an important call to human being. As for his death and legacy, so once again, Osei's life came to an end around 1717 during a campaign against the Akyem people, and therefore but he was still remembered as a founding figure. But he did die in a battle, which just showed maybe an overextension. At least his empire still continued to exist after him, but maybe taking extensive risks if he's dying in a battle. Maybe he could have done more great things if he had lived, but maybe had he lived, maybe he would have destroyed his own empire. Perhaps unlikely to be true, but it's impossible to rule out because he died in the battlefield before his natural time. Also, the golden stool, which he introduced with his chief priest, remains a powerful symbol of Ashanti unity and identity. throughout the course of the empire, and even till today as an important symbol in Ghana. His contributions to the military, political, and cultural life of the Ashanti people have left an indelible mark on the history of Ghana and West Africa. Osei Tutu's legacy is celebrated to this day, and he is revered as one of the greatest African leaders in history. His vision, leadership, and achievements laid the foundation for the Ashanti Empire's rise to greatness and ensured its place in the annals of African history. So very, very important, fascinating leader, happens to be a founder as well, and a very fascinating and unique empire, the Ashanti Empire. So as to discuss the content of the slide, one can see it here. And we have the title is Osei Tutu and the Ashanti Empire. It was an Akan state, the Akan people and tribes in modern-day Ghana, the Ivory Coast, and Togo. It is the most extensively studied and there are more historic records by European authors, particularly the British, than any other indigenous culture in sub-Saharan Africa. Significant leader, once again, is Osei Tutu. The empire was the Ashanti Empire. The period was from approximately 1670, or officially 1701, when Osei Tutu became emperor, to 1902, Common Era. CE. Modern locations include Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Togo. Million square kilometers would be 0.25. Million square miles would be 0.1, and percent of the world would be 0.19%. So this is smaller than our average empire of our list, which is 1.14. But, for example, one of the most documented empires of all time, the Athenian Empire, was less than 10% of this, less than 0.01%. So size doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't depth of history, and also 1 million square kilometers in one region is not as easy to conquer and rule over as 1 million square kilometers in somewhere more desolate. That's why Antarctica is excluded from our calculation here as well. Here, it must be noted that there were warring states and existing empires in this region, so it wouldn't be a very easy area to rule over. And percent of the world would be 0.19%. The capital was Kumasi, as founded by Osei Tutu, or chosen as well. The government was a monarchy. Common languages was Ashanti, or also known as Twi, was the official language. The religion was Akan initially, and they later shifted to Christianity through colonialism, particularly the British and the Dutch. Population was approximately 3 million at one of its heights, or perhaps at its peak as well. So a little bit smaller, but given the region and the population, is quite significant. As for images, in the top left, we have the emblem, a porcupine of the Ashanti Empire. Below that, we have a kente cloth, which was a traditional garment worn by the Ashanti royalty and has widely been adopted throughout the Ashanti kingdom. So we can see the beautiful patterns, etc., that make this kente cloth a sign of the nobility, and particularly the royalty as well. To the right of that, we have an image of the golden stool, also known as the Sika Dwa, in the Ashanti Kingdom in 1935. So after the end of the Ashanti Empire, they're still revering this stool. And now it's quite fascinating that we can see actual pictures, and many, up until this point, we've had very few images, real photographs, because many of we've gone through this Ages of Empire series chronologically, so it's cool that we can actually start seeing real photographs. To the right of that, we have English officers. This is a drawing selecting quarters at the chief's palace in Fomena, so highlighting the interactions between the British and the Ashanti Kingdom Empire, but also showing their fascinating architecture with these large columns. To the right of that, we have the below that, we have the Aban Palace at the time of the Third Anglo-Ashanti War in 1874. So also see the height and the military advantage of this fortress, their chief's palace particularly. And to the right of that, we have a photograph of the we have a photograph of the ruins in the late 19th or early 20th century of the Siso, or the Great Court, which served as the abode where the Council of the Kumasi assembled, so the Council of the capital city. So once again, the council formed by Osei Tutu, sort of divide and conquer once again. Marie Joseph Bennett documented in the 1870s said that the meeting of the Supreme Court of Justice and Legislation takes place every day in the court of the royal palace called the Aprameso, or the para ca say so, the court measured 30 to 35 meters long by 14 to 15 meters wide. So a very, very big, large building, but it must also be noted that the judiciary, the justices, and the legislation met together, so perhaps in some ways somewhat of a unified judicial and legislative branch, which Montesquieu document should be distinct but also have interdependencies also documented in the Federalist Papers as well. The three branches should be distinct but have dependencies. We have the shortened history here. So established in 1701, independence from the Denkyira, in 1701. The annexation, and it was annexed to form the British Ashanti Crown Colony in 1901. Self-rule within the British colony in 1935. State union as Ashanti region with Ghana. It was in 1957, and the state union exists till this day. It was preceded by the Denkyira, which, as we noted, Osei Tutu sought autonomy, defeated and conquered from, and as well the Bonoman. And it was succeeded by the Ashanti Crown Colony and Ghana as well, as a crown colony, as a subordinate state to the British Empire, which we will soon cover. And in the top right, we have the map where we can see Africa, Sub-Sahara, and we can see Ghana primarily, but parts of Cote d'Ivoire and Togo as well. So very fascinating empire, and rounding out our African empire history as well. This is also a very busy area. Sub-Saharan Africa has been where many of our most significant African empires have been. Not all of them. Technically, Egypt's there as well, Morocco as well. There's so many important empires, but nonetheless, this has been a very active region. So, to move to the First and Second Mexican Empires. So combined once again in the Portuguese Empire, we combined the First and Second, but we could have divided them, but they were only for short periods. For example, the First Mexican Empire was only from 1821 to 1821 to 1823, and the second was from 1863 to 1867. So it might make sense to combine them, but we'll try to differentiate them. So starting with the First Mexican Empire from 1821 to 1823, so also known as the Mexican Empire, or in Spanish Imperio Mexicano, was a constitutional monarchy and the first independent government of Mexico, and the only former viceroyalty of the Spanish Empire to establish a monarchy after the independence. It lasted for 2 years, from 1821 to 1823, and it is one of the few modern-era independent monarchies that have existed in the Americas, along with the 67-year Empire of Brazil from 1822 to 1889, which we shall discuss, and the 2-year First Empire of Haiti in 1804 to 1806. So these are the three significant monarchies in the Americas only. So as for the rise of the First Mexican Empire, so the First Mexican Empire was established in the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence, a conflict that began in 1810 under the leaders like Miguel Hidalgo. I think the book about Hidalgo the horse is in some ways inspired by that name, but I'm not certain. And Jose Maria Morelos, a very famous figure as well. And after the protracted conflict and struggle against the Spanish colonial rule, Mexico finally achieved independence in 1821. This decisive moment came with the Plan of Iguala, and formulated by Agustín de Iturbide, who we will highlight in a specific Iturbide, whom we will highlight in a specific biography. I've been pronouncing it wrong; it should be Iturbide. And Vicente Guerrero, which called for an independent Mexican monarchy, equality of social classes, and the continued protection of Roman Catholicism. So, as presented with the Ashanti Empire, with respect to the British Empire, the First Empire gaining autonomy from the Spanish Empire, a very, very significant empire, one of the largest we've covered of all time, is a very significant achievement during this short period, at least. On September 27, 1821, Mexico declared its independence from Spain, and Agustín de Iturbide was crowned Emperor. Agustín I on May 19, 1822. The new empire spanned much of the former viceroyalty of New Spain, encompassing modern-day Mexico and parts of Central America as well: Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and parts of the United States, southern United States as well. As for the fall, however, of this Mexican Empire, so as mentioned, a very short period. The first Mexican Empire was short-lived, and Iturbide's rule faced numerous challenges, including political fragmentation, economic instability, and resistance from Republican factions. His autocratic style of governance and failure to address the pressing economic issues alienated many, including influential military leaders. So it was difficult. Some are good at founding empires, but some aren't as good at keeping them. Some are good at keeping empires, but maybe would not be able to found empires as well. So one can make their own judgment where Agustín de Iturbide stands on that spectrum, with those spectrums. His autocratic style and governance failed to address the pressing economic issues and alienated many, including the influential military leaders. So, divide and conquer is valuable if your local governors or military leaders support you. By early 1823, dissatisfaction with Iturbide's rule reached a critical point. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, very famous Santa Anna, and other leaders initiated a revolt, issuing the Plan of Casamata, which called for the establishment of a republic. It's the famous Santa Anna. Facing overwhelming opposition, Iturbide abdicated on March 19, 1823, and went into exile. The first Mexican empire officially ended, and the United Mexican States became a republic, was therefore established. But then came the Second Mexican Empire from 1864 to 1867. So the Second Mexican Empire, officially known as, also referred to as the Mexican Empire, so there's therefore sometimes it's unclear whether one's referring to the first or second, so therefore we've combined them, even in one, considering their shorter periods. Or Imperio Mexicano, once again, was a constitutional monarchy established in Mexico by the Mexican monarchists in conjunction with the Second French Empire. So also it may be considered in some ways subordinate to the Second French Empire. So therefore we use the term empire loosely here, but because it's given the name empire, we included it in the list, and given its geographical size. For example, once again, going back to the Athenian Empire, if the Athenian Empire was an empire at less than 0.01% of the world, this at 4.429 million square kilometers, even if more divided, and pardon me, that's the size of the first Mexican Empire, but even if more divided, given the land mass, it should still be, we still want to cover it in our list of empires. And therefore the period is sometimes referred as the Second French Intervention in Mexico as well for this reason. French Emperor Napoleon III, with the support of very famous Napoleon III, with the support of the Mexican conservatives, clergy, and the nobility, so the conservative elements supported Napoleon III, and established a monarchist ally with the Americas, intended as a restraint upon the growing United States. So many of our empires have been created because of opposing threats. Think of our Greek empires as with the Persian threats, for example. It has been viewed as both an independent Mexican monarchy and a client state of France as well. So it wasn't quite as autonomous nor large as the first Mexican Empire. So, as for the rise of the Second Mexican Empire, so the Second Mexican Empire emerged in the context of the French intervention of Mexico, driven by European geopolitical interests and internal Mexican conflicts. In 1861, Benito Juárez, the liberal president of Mexico, suspended debt repayments to foreign countries, prompting France, Britain, and Spain to intervene. While Britain and Spain withdrew after negotiations, France, under Napoleon III, pursued a more ambitious goal of establishing a monarchy in Mexico. So, once again, political, economy, and military are inevitably tied, and this country was facing failure to repay its debts. So, therefore, France took advantage of this opportunity to establish a monarchy. Napoleon III sought to create a French-aligned empire in the Americas and found a candidate in Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian in Austria. With support of the Mexican conservatives who opposed Juárez's liberal reforms, Maximilian was accepted the crown, so from Austria, and in 1864 French forces installed Maximilian as Emperor of Mexico, so at least nominally called an empire. if not ruled by, in some ways, by the Second French Empire. Napoleon III sought to create a French-aligned empire, and that's what he did. So as for the reign of Maximilian I, so Maximilian I sought to modernize Mexico and implement liberal reforms, including land redistribution and labor rights. However, his policies alienated his conservative supporters without gaining significant support from liberals or the broader Mexican population, so lost his base and failed to gain the other. Additionally, the empire was heavily reliant on the French military support, which became increasingly untenable. So they relied on the French support to have their military autonomy, but France was starting to weaken as well, the Second French Empire. So then came the fall of the Second Mexican Empire, or the French intervention in Mexico. So the fall of the Second Mexican Empire was precipitated by several factors. Internationally, the end of the American Civil War in 1865 allowed the United States to pressure France to withdraw forces under the Monroe Doctrine. Domestically, Benito Juarez continued to lead a determined resistance against the imperial regime. By 1866, French troops and the Second Mexican Empire are marked by the French troops began withdrawing from Mexico and leaving the empire isolated and facing increasing resistance. So they've been seeking all this autonomy, but they lost their support, and Maximilian's position became untenable as well. In 1867, Republican forces led by Juarez captured Maximilian, and he was tried and executed on June 19, 1867, marking the definitive end of the Second Mexican Empire, or both Mexican empires. As for the legacy of the Mexican empires, so the histories of the First and Second Mexican empires are marked by attempts to establish monarchical rule in a country deeply divided by social, political, and economic interests. So there was for example, indigenous people, there was Spanish and the French, so very, very diverse, and even diverse at the indigenous level. We've also covered many important indigenous empires here previously as well. And therefore, both empires were characterized by short-lived reigns, internal conflicts, and external influence. So still very significant achievements in both times to form and to have empires, although short-lived. The First Mexican Empire is highlighted by challenges of transitioning from colonial rule to independence, with competing visions of the nature's future, while the Second Mexican Empire is underscored by its impact on foreign intervention and the resilience of republican ideals in Mexico. So maybe one is characterized by overthrowing colonial rule, and the other is characterized by taking advantage of colonial rule and then falling because of lack thereof. Both periods left lasting legacies, shaping the nation's political landscape and contributing to a complex historical narrative. So as for a specific ruler, we have Agustín de Iturbide of the First Mexican Empire. So also full name, we have Agustín Cosme Damián de Iturbide and Aramburu. And he was born on the 27th of September 1783, and he died on the 19th of July 1824, commonly known as Agustín de Iturbide, and later by his regnal name Agustín I. And he was the first emperor of Mexico, or the First Mexican Empire, from 1822 until his abdication in 1823. An officer in the Royal Spanish Army to begin with, during the Mexican War of Independence, he initially fought insurgent forces rebelling against the Spanish crown before changing sides in 1820 and leading a coalition of former royalists and long-term insurgents under his plan of Iguala, so knowing how to switch sides, maybe for better or worse, at least to his own advantage. The combined forces under Iturbide brought Mexican independence in 1821. After securing succession of Mexico from Spain, Iturbide was proclaimed president of the Regency in 1821. A year later, he was proclaimed emperor, reigning from 19th of May 1822 till the 19th of March 1823, so for a short period of time, but nonetheless an emperor nonetheless, when he abdicated himself. In May 1823, he went into exile in Europe. When he returned to Mexico on July 1824, he was arrested and executed. But although he was forced into abdication, however, pardon me. As for his early life and background, so Agustín de Iturbide, once again, was born on the September 27th, 1783 in Valladolid, New Spain, which is now in Morelia, Mexico. Mexico. He came from a wealthy Spanish Basque family. So must be the D'Artagnan is a Basque in the Three Musketeers, and I actually researched why is it important that the D'Artagnan is a Basque and D'Artagnan is the protagonist. He is not one of the Three Musketeers, but why is it Basque? Basque apparently would be analogous to being from Texas in the United States, for being from a warlike state. So therefore Spanish Basque, therefore he comes from a warlike Spanish group, but also from the Spanish sort of colonial group, not from the indigenous groups within Mexico as well. But Basque would be somewhat of a minority back in Spain itself, which provided him with a privileged upbringing and education, but nonetheless from a wealthy family and still Spanish. He joined the Royalist army of New Spain and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming known for his bravery and military skills, so initially aligning with the Spanish Empire. As for his military career and role in the War of Independence, so initially Iturbide was a staunch royalist, fighting against the insurgent forces and seeking independence and seeking to align itself with Spain. But nonetheless, he served under various Spanish commanders and played a key role in suppressing the revolts. However, his career took a dramatic turn in 1820 when he was assigned to quell the rebellion led by Vicente Guerrero. Rather than confront Guerrero in battle, Iturbide saw an opportunity to unify the diverse fighting factions for independence. He proposed the Plan of Iguala in 1821, which called for the Mexican independence and establishment of a constitutional monarchy, so forming a monarch itself, equality among social classes, and the protection of Roman Catholicism. So once again, religion tied to the creation of an empire, tied to his own authority. This plan brought together royalists and insurgents under a common cause. As for their independence and rise to power, so the Plan of Iguala gained widespread support, and the Treaty of Cordoba was signed on August 24, 1821, which formally recognized Mexican independence from Spain. With the support of the military and various political factions, Iturbide entered Mexico City in triumph, September 27, 1821. So once again, a triumph as a way to inspire pride and support for this new monarchy, as we saw triumphs originally from Rome, big parades essentially. The new nation's leadership was uncertain, however, with a power vacuum ensued. And on May 19, 1822, amid growing political instability and pressure from his supporters, Iturbide was proclaimed emperor of Mexico, taking the name Agustín I, so first of his name, so therefore first emperor. As for his reign as emperor, but in some ways through necessity, he came into this position through the power vacuum, but a power vacuum in some ways he created to begin with. So as emperor, Iturbide faced significant challenges. His rule was marked by attempts to stabilize the nation, but his autocratic tendencies and failure to address economic and social issues alienated many. His administration struggled with debt, lack of resources, and political infighting. Iturbide's government was unable to gain broad support, and his reliance on his personal authority rather than institutional governance led to widespread dissatisfaction, so perhaps should have done more of the divide and conquer method by early, or at least should have had more closer alliances with those other powerful individuals who helped him come to power as well. By early 1823, opposition grew, and influential leaders like Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the very famous Santa Anna, initiated a rebellion under the Plan of Casamata, calling for the establishment of the Republic. As for his abdication and exile, so facing overwhelming opposition and the loss of support from the military and political elite, Iturbide abdicated the throne on March 19, 1823. He went into exile in Italy and later moved to England. However, he was not content and to remain in exile and hoped to return to Mexico, so perhaps like a Napoleon Bonaparte, return from exile. But facing overwhelming opposition and the loss of support from the military and political elite, he abdicated from the throne on March 19, 1823, and therefore was in exile. And in 1824, believing he could reclaim power and restore order, Iturbide returned to Mexico, so like a Napoleon in this way. Unfortunately, the political climate had shifted significantly, and the new Republican government declared him a traitor, and upon his arrival he was arrested and executed by firing squad on July 19th, so 1824, in Padilla, Tamaulipas. So very different fate from when Napoleon returned. Napoleon returned and he was welcomed and even had 100 days return and then was exiled again. Whereas Agustín I, or Agustín de Iturbide, was not welcome. He was executed by a firing squad. So very different in that way. So as for his legacy, so Agustín de Iturbide remains a controversial figure in Mexican history. He played a crucial role in achieving Mexican independence and uniting diverse factions under the Plan of Iguala. So perhaps some of the unitedness to this day still exists because of him, and seeking autonomy from Spain was also very, very significant. He played a crucial role in achieving Mexican independence and uniting diverse factions, once again. However, his tenure as emperor was marked by autocracy, political instability, and economic challenges, so perhaps maybe too aggressive in taking authority, and perhaps maybe even somewhat greed. Once he even became emperor, he wanted to keep all the power to himself. Despite his flaws, Iturbide's efforts laid the groundwork for Mexico's transition from a colonial rule to an independent nation. So maybe if it weren't for him, it might have still been part of Spain, for example. His legacy is complex, reflecting both his contributions to independence and the turbulent nature of his reign. Today, he is remembered as a key figure in Mexico's struggle for independence and as an example of the challenges faced by new nations in establishing stable governance. So there's the very important Agustín de Iturbide and the First and Second Mexico Empires. As for the content of these slides, so in the so the title, we have Agustín de Iturbide and the First and Second Mexican Empires. It's also known as the first independent government of Mexico and the only former viceroyalty of the Spanish Empire to establish a monarchy after independence. That is the First Mexican Empire. As for the Second Empire, it was a constitutional monarchy established by Mexican monarchists in conjunction with the Second French Empire. So that's the Second Mexican Empire. The significant leader we highlighted was Agustín de Iturbide. The empire was the First and Second Mexican Empires. It was from the period 1821 to 1823 was the First Mexican Empire, and 1863 to 1867 was the Second Mexican Empire. Modern locations include Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and the United States, parts of the southern United States. The Second Mexican Empire, must be noted, was smaller, primarily in Mexico itself. In terms of area, million square kilometers would be 4.429, so very massive. Our average is 1.14, and that's only the largest empires that made the list in terms of geographical size. But it must be noted that not all regions are as easy to conquer as others, so the indigenous peoples were there first, then there was the Spanish as well, so very formidable history to conquer and rule over, and then perhaps some of the reasons, for example, Agustín de Iturbide had difficulties ruling over it, and then would come the French as well with the Second Mexican Empires. So even if it had lasted, maybe the French would have tried to assert authority there as well, regardless. And million square miles equivalent would be 1.71%. Of the world would be 3.29%. The capital was Mexico City, a very beautiful city I've been fortunate to visit, very massive as well. And the government was a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy. Common languages was Spanish. Religion was Roman Catholicism was the official, and in part of the creation of the First Mexican Empire was on the Roman Catholic principles. Population was 6.5 million, so very large. for the time, but smaller than the population of the region today, and larger than many of the empires we've covered previously. But it's also more recent in history as well. As for images, in the top left we have a posthumous portrait of the Emperor of Mexico by Primitivo Miranda, 1865. That's Agustín de Iturbide, a posthumous image, but endeavored to be accurate. Sort of one of those great images with big pylons and sort of very Napoleonic outside, and really classical architecture is my favorite personally. Classical paintings. There's everyone loves Impressionism, but personally I prefer classical. Some others do as well, but I'd say fewer. To the right of that, we have the coat of arms of the first Mexican Empire. So as we can see already, still to this day, the colors of Mexico are red, green, white, and red in that order. And at this time, the colors were already formed. As well, we have two more flags. We have the flag of the three guarantees, which changed meaning over time. There's very fascinating history of what the three mean and what they have meant over time. And below that, we have the we have the state flag as well, once again showing that famous eagle, which is also, or the bird of the Mexican bird of which is the same as that on the coat of arms. To the right of that, we have a very important image, although it's an old photograph, the photograph of the execution of Maximilian I of Mexico and the generals Miramon and Mejia. Left to right, they are Mejia, Miramon, and Maximilian, so him being executed, a very tragic event in history, also marked similarly the life of Agustín I, who was also executed by firing squad. Below that, we have the Maximilian Plan, the monument to Christopher Columbus for the Grand Boulevard, now called the Paseo de la Reforma, a place I've been fortunate to visit in Mexico City, and it was built during the regime of Porfirio Diaz, so showing their appreciation for Christopher Columbus and sort of part of their appreciation for that heritage, which, and once again, it's a very diverse region that Christopher Columbus doesn't necessarily align with everyone's ideal or history of the area. To the right of that, we have a delegation of the Kickapoo, which indigenous people being received at the royal court. So once again, manifesting the differences in cultures and peoples ruled under this one empire over two periods, first and seconds. And below that, we also have a Mexican railway bridge by Jose Maria Velasco Gomez, a painting in 1877, but also showing how recent we are getting in time. Very substantial architectural and technological achievements during this time. It's very much changed, and kind of just an appreciation for how far we've come in terms of history. And in the top right, we have the 4.429 million square kilometers under the first Mexican Empire. The second Mexican Empire would be predominantly in Mexico proper, but nonetheless a very, very massive region, coast to coast, and both all the way into Central America. So, as for a comparison between the two leaders in the style of Plutarch's parallel lives, to hopefully learn a bit more about the two through their differences and their respective empires. So, comparison of Osei Tutu of the Ashanti Empire and Agustín de Iturbide of the first Mexican Empire. So, differences and similarities in their background and early life. So, Osei Tutu was born around 1660 of the Oyoko clan of the Akan people in what is modern-day Ghana. His early life, he was sent to the court of the Dankira, a dominant neighboring state, where he learned the governance and military strategies. As for his rise to power, after returning to his homeland, he succeeded his uncle as chief and began unifying the Akan states into what became known as the Ashanti Empire with the help of his chief priest and advisor, Okomfo Onopie. As for Agustín de Iturbide, he was born on September 27, 1783, so quite a while after, in Valladolid, New Spain, now Morelia, Mexico, to a wealthy Basque family, so both from noble and wealthy families. As for his early life, he joined the royalist army and rose through the ranks, becoming known for his military skills of New Spain. So both of them sort of joining an existing empire before forming their own. As for his rise to power, He initially began fighting against independence movements, and later switched sides and became a crucial role in the Mexican independence by formulating the Plan of Iguala, eventually becoming the first emperor of Mexico. So very similar in that they both fought for this previous empire and then rebelled again, forming their own. As for their leadership and governance, so Osei Tutu with unification. So Osei Tutu's significant achievement was the unification of the Akan states into the Ashanti Empire. The creation of the golden stool symbolized the unity and spiritual foundation of the empire. So, and Agustín de Iturbide was very focused on Roman Catholicism, so both of them tied their growth of state to religion as well. Whereas Osei Tutu necessarily, though, had this chief priest who was very key in his life, whereas Agustín de Iturbide was more generally supportive of Roman Catholicism, but maybe we could say the Pope, or maybe the Pope delegates in the region still. Nonetheless, a very similar notion in terms of gaining their empire's success and forming their empires. As for Osei Tutu's military strategy, he led successful military campaigns, notably defeating the Dankira, and solidified the Ashanti's dominance in the region. As for political structures, he established a centralized administration in Kumasi, the capital, balancing centralized power within the local autonomy through the Ashanti Confederacy, so balancing authority and autonomy, making a state that would continue to exist. Whereas Agustín de Iturbide was an independence leader. Iturbide's major contribution was the Plan of Iguala, so not really a unifier, but rather he united various factions to achieve Mexican independence, so maybe a divider. As for military strategy, he led royalist forces before switching to the independence movement, leveraging military experience to unite disparate groups. So uniting disparate groups still, so in some ways a uniter, but nonetheless both of them were very successful military strategists, almost a necessity for great leaders of these times. As for political structure, as emperor he struggled with autocratic tendencies and failed to stabilize the nation, leading to political fragmentation and dissatisfaction, so perhaps overstepping his power, whereas Osei Tutu formed a council and a confederation as somewhat maybe more humble in terms of sharing his power, whereas Agustín de Iturbide wanted more autocracy after he already became emperor. As for their achievements and challenges, Osei Tutu's is credited with the founding of the Ashanti Empire, creating a unified and powerful state that became a major regional power in West Africa and continued long after him. His establishment of the golden stool as a unifying symbol was significant cultural and political achievement, as well as founding a capital and a council and a judiciary. As for challenges, his reign faced challenges of maintaining unity among diverse clans and managing the expansion of the empire. His death in battle marked a significant moment of vulnerability for the empire, so perhaps also overstepping. As for Agustín de Iturbide achievements, Iturbide's pivotal role in the Mexico independence is a significant achievement. He succeeded in uniting royalists and insurgents to end the Spanish colonial rule. So both sort of uniting insurgents against an existing empire, analogous there, and both founders of empires. As for challenges for Agustín de Iturbide, his reign as emperor was marked by economic instability, political infighting, and resistance from Republican factions. His autocratic rule and failure to address these issues led to the abdication and eventual execution. So, therefore, one was executed, but one died in battle. So both of them were overstepped, perhaps, and if they were slower, maybe if Osei Tutu did not engage in that battle, or maybe he had to go into that battle, but maybe Agustín de Iturbide, maybe he could not have formed the state without his autocratic tendencies, but both of them were killed rather than stepping down for the throne. And so Agustín de Iturbide did flee for a while to Italy, but he came back and was executed. So nonetheless, their ambition got the best of them, but maybe if they had not had that ambition in the first place, we wouldn't be discussing them today. As for their legacies, Osei Tutu, as for cultural impact, Osei Tutu's legacy includes the cultural and political institutions he established, which continued to shape the Ashanti Empire long after his death. As for historical significance, he is remembered as a unifier and a visionary leader whose actions laid the foundation for one of Africa's most powerful states. It's most documented in the sub-Saharan region. As for Agustín de Iturbide, his cultural impact, Iturbide's legacy is more controversial, marked by his role in achieving independence, but also by his failed attempt to establish a stable monarchy, ending the first Mexican Empire as well, for historical and a much shorter-lived empire. As for his historical significance, he is remembered as a key figure in Mexico's struggle for independence, with a mixed legacy reflecting the challenges and transition from colonial rule to manhood, or to nationhood, pardon me. So both of them very much battled with this juxtaposition between the colonial rule and also the indigenous people, but whereas Agustín de Iturbide, the colonial British and Dutch would come later, for Osei Tutu they would come later in the course of the empire, whereas Agustín de Iturbide was actually in many ways taking advantage of the colonial power. So very, very nuanced interactions with these two respective empires with respect to their relations with colonial empires, particularly New Spain and particularly the Spanish Empire and British empires, but very, very nuanced and very much in some ways tragic individuals too, both of them sort of. But Osei Tutu's legacy is seen more positive because his empire continued to last longer. So, thus, Osei Tutu and Agustín de Iturbide were both pivotal figures in their respective histories, leading their efforts to unify and establish powerful states. Osei Tutu's success in creating a lasting empire contrasts with Iturbide's brief and tumultuous reign. Both leaders faced significant challenges, but their legacies reflect their critical roles in shaping the political landscapes of the Ashanti Empire and First Mexican Empire. Where they're similar, they're also both founders of empires. So both two objectively great individuals. They both don't have perfect moral track records, perhaps. Maybe they should never have formed these empires, one might even argue. But certainly we cannot forget them. We cannot ignore them, perhaps. So then very different paths, but sort of different to unite with religion, etc. There's very, very many unique and much we can learn about statecraft today. So thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we are covering all the empires throughout history. This is episode 65, where we covered the Ashanti Empire and the First and Second Mexican Empires, as well the two specific leaders. We have Osei Tutu from the Ashanti Empire and Agustín de Iturbide of the First Mexican Empire. Once again, this is Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft, and I'd be very, very grateful if you continue to support. Thank you so much.